So welcome, Sharon. She is tonight's speaker, and she's going to show us how landlord and landladies we have to be compliant, because there's lots of things changing, and COVID is not going away, and eviction and whatnot, and it's a lot of the rules and whatnot would have to be really born in our mind, sort of, isn't it, Sharon? So thank you for coming and give us an update and the educational evening, I hope. And so, Sharon, would you like to unmute yourself and speak?
Hi, Yoko. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Thank you. Sorry, Sharon. Can everybody see Sharon's face or everybody's face? If you'd like to change your view, on the right-hand side top, usually, if you're looking at the computer, there is a view, and you can change your view, you can keep flipping and whatnot, and then that's no problem. So, sorry, Sharon. Please go ahead.
Okay, no, I was just going to say I've got some slides to go through. So is it okay if I do a share
screen? Yes, please share. Yeah. Thank you.
Let me see if that works. Right. What can you? I've got two screens. So which what can you see? Can you see a presentation or my Zoom screen?
No, it's a big the presentation with the slide on the left-hand side.
Right, so you can see, right, okay, brilliant. Let me, so if I do slideshow.
Full screen, yeah. I can see a next slide.
Ah, right, okay, let me swap it. Hang on. There is a way to swap screens. Hang on, how do you do that? I had this problem before. Oh, right.
Ah, there we go.
Okay, yes. You should be able to see a landscape of Manchester with my name across it. Is that what you can see?
Yes, that's right.
Fabulous, we'll get there. One day I'll get hang of Zoom, but it's different every time we log on, isn't it? Anyway, right, so good evening, everybody. And thank you so much to Yoko for inviting me to be a guest here tonight. I'm Sharon Mashen. And I thought I would just start by telling you a little bit about myself. There's quite a few people on here that I don't know. There's some nice friendly faces. So hi Jenny, hi Bryony, hi Norman, but lots of people I don't know. Let me just introduce myself quickly. So I'm Sharon. I started my career on the graduate training scheme with United Utilities, which is a FTSE 100 company. I worked my way up the management ladder, and I ended up staying there for nearly 20 years. That wasn't the plan. I thought I'd do the graduate scheme and then go off and do other things. But I'm sure you all know, life takes over. So I ended up being a career graduate at UU. I did gain a lot of experience working in strategy and regulation areas of the business in particular. And my last role there before I resigned, because I did resign to actually go into property, which I'll explain a little bit more about later, I was senior programme manager responsible for the price review. Now, if you don't know anything about the water industry, the only thing you do need to know is the price review is the be-all and end-all in the water industry. It takes 2.5 years to put together a strategic business plan, and that is submitted to the regulator. And this plan sets out what you as customers are going to pay for your water bills for the next 5 years. It sets out the amount of investment that will be made in infrastructure across the region. And it also sets out what the contracts are going to look like with the subcontractors to deliver that infrastructure. So it's a significant piece of work. It impacts the share price, and it usually leads to restructuring the business in order to meet the inevitable cost challenges. Now, at the time, little did I realise this experience would be invaluable in helping me now run my own business and also deal with the legislation that impacts the property industry. And as Yoko explained in the introduction, that's what I'm going to be focusing on here tonight to help you navigate the minefield that is the legislation of the private rented sector. So that's all well and good, but then how did I get started in property? So let me also introduce you to Steve. Steve and I started investing in the early 2000s. Steve is both my husband and business partner. Now, in the early 2000s, we both had good careers and we weren't really thinking about property investing at all at that time. But at the time, there was a lot of stories in the press about how unaffordable state pensions had become. You probably don't remember this, but it was one of those stories that got in my head and I just couldn't get rid of it. So it got us thinking about our long-term plan, what our plan was and what our retirement would look like. So that's why at the time we realised only we was responsible for our lives and our future, and that's when we first started getting interested in property. Now, back then we didn't know anyone else investing, we didn't know anything about property, we'd never heard of any training courses, so we just went out and bought stuff, you know, like you do. You go to a local agent, you look on Rightmove, and you go and buy something. If we got £500 or £1,000 off the asking price, we thought we were doing well. We really didn't know what we were doing. Our first purchase was an off-plan apartment. Now, for those of you that have done lots of property networking, you know this is a typical rookie mistake. We still have that very first property today. It's done okay. I mean, it's been full. We've not had any voids there, so it's been cash flowing. The capital value, the less said about that, the better. But fortunately for us, we only bought the one, and then we quickly moved on to buying 2-bed terraces, which turned out to be much better investment. Now, the process of buying houses at this stage was very gradual. We hadn't heard of below market value or momentum investing strategy or anything like that. So we simply saved up enough money from our jobs, went for a deposit, and then went to buy a house. So after a while, we decided we had enough property to cover our pension plans, and we didn't really want to be active landlords as we both had busy day jobs. So the properties really, you know, potted along in the background. We went back to climbing the career ladder. And this continued for a good few years until the global recession, the last global recession. I'm not counting the one that we're about to enter now. That's a whole different topic. But the last one impacted Steve's job, and he was in the car industry at that time. He was offered a really good voluntary redundancy package. It was too good to refuse. So basically we took the money and ran. Now at that time, we had an inkling that we might reinvest in property, but actually Steve had an opportunity to go over to Vietnam for a couple of months, treasure hunting with a guy he knows, and that's a completely different story altogether. But while he was away, I started working out how far the money would go and how we could spend his redundancy money and how many properties we could invest in, and I quickly realised that even though it was a good package, the money wouldn't go very far if we were investing how we'd always been investing. And I knew we had to fast track our learning to invest much more effectively. So the upshot of that was we signed up to the Tiger training programme. So while Steve was away, I went to a discovery day and I signed us up to a weekend course. When he came back, he wasn't very happy, but I dragged him along and we ended up signing up to the Tiger training programme. And it was through this programme, this is where we now started to learn about below market value properties and the momentum investing strategy, which is what we use to get started. Now, by now for us, the timing was good for us, as by this point it was 2011, and there were lots of repossessed properties coming to the market at this time. We quickly built up our portfolio, and within 6 months a friend saw what we were doing and offered us a significant amount of capital to go into a joint venture partnership with him. So this is the stuff that we heard about on the courses, and we thought, we don't know anyone like that, this is never going to happen to us, but it did. Our friend just saw what we were doing, we were getting good results, you know, we were telling everybody about what we were doing, which is what they tell you to do on courses, and we weren't even looking for a business partner at that time, but obviously we grabbed the opportunity with both hands. And that really kick-started our property management business as well, because now we needed someone to manage all these properties. And they tell you on courses to get an agent, but in all honesty, I couldn't find an agent that offered the level of service and the investor mindset that I wanted for my properties. So that's when we set up Foxdog Properties to manage our own portfolio. So at this point, we were buying houses at a fair pace using the momentum investing strategy. We were buying repossessed properties. At that time, a lot of the owners actually willfully damage the properties on the way out. So they would leave the bath running and the kitchen ceiling would come down. They'd steal the copper pipe work. So there was lots of opportunity for us to refurbish and force capital appreciation. And then through that, we then refinanced to release funds to go on to the next project. Now, at first, even though I was working full time still at this point, we did a lot of the refurbishment ourselves. So Steve has qualifications in engineering and he's got 20 years practical experience. So he's got a lot of the skills that we needed to do a lot of the work ourselves. And that's how we started out. I'm sure it's a story familiar to many of you. You know, you want to do the work yourself at the beginning, first of all, to learn what to do, or maybe you don't know where to get trades from, or even to save some money. So that's what we did. However, the speed at which we were buying property very quickly increased, and we simply didn't have the time to do the numerous different projects that we had on the go all at the same time. And we're also taking on bigger projects as our confidence grew. So we were soon doing full back to brick refurbishments requiring specialists such as damp treatment, wall tile replacement, putting in lintels to reconfigure the property. This property here is a great example. This is one of our early projects. It's an interesting story, this. The house was owned by an elderly gentleman and he lived there on his own. And for about the last 30 years of his life, I mean, he must have been pushing 90 when he passed away. He'd refused all family help and it hadn't been decorated for at least 30 years, probably more. The house was riddled with damp throughout. There was all sorts of damp. There was rising damp, there was penetrating damp, there was dry rot. It was so extensive, it rotted away all the floor joists. You can see in the picture here that we're replacing all of the floor joists and the flooring. We took the opportunity to completely remodel the house as well. So we treated for damp everywhere downstairs. We resized the bedrooms. We created an open plan kitchen dining. The kitchen was tiny. I don't know what the original builders were thinking of. There wasn't room to swing a cat in the kitchen. There wasn't even room for a fridge. There was a sink and there was an old slate slab that people used to use before fridges to keep their food cold, and that was it in the kitchen. So it was a really interesting project. Externally, we had a lot of work done there as well. So we replaced all the wall ties, we removed the front porch that was falling down, we replaced all the windows and doors, and we repointed the brickwork. So this was a great learning experience for us. So it was a great time as well. And my experience in corporate, by this point, I was a program manager. So very soon we ended up offering a full end-to-end hands-off service to other investors. So our friend was the first one, and then obviously he referred his friends and family, and very soon we were doing everything from sourcing properties, hand-holding through the conveyancing process, we were managing the refurbishment, and then we were also managing the properties as well, so carrying out the day-to-day management activities. Now, at this point, I've got around 30 refurbs under my belt at this point, both my own properties and also for properties that we've sourced and managed for other people. We've dealt with everything from me painting the walls with the paint pod. Do you remember those paint pods? That was my first job. But we've gone on to work with major projects. We've done JCT contracts with housing associations. That was quite interesting. We ran into overruns and disputes with liquidated damages. I now understand CDM regulations inside out. We had a really, really good principal designer that helped us on a good few projects. So finding the right people to work with as well is absolutely crucial. It was during this time when I was networking that I met an international mentor from Legacy. So Tigrant has, it's not called Tigrant anymore, it was when I did it. Their international arm was called Legacy. And he saw one of my presentations on the projects we were working on, and he asked me if I'd like to help overseas investors build portfolios in the Northwest. So as a result of that conversation, Steve and I were very soon hosting hundreds of potential investors from all over the world. It was a great time. We met some fabulous people. Many of them have become our clients, remain our clients today, and we're in touch with still many more today, which is great. So we'd spend a full day with them. We'd show them around the delights of Warrington, We were expert tour guides. We would show them all the inward infrastructure investment. So at that time, they were just building the big Amazon distribution centre on the motorway, expanding the motorway. I mean, all that work's still going on. Every time I drive past, there's another big industrial unit sprung up from nowhere. And we take them to our live projects as well and show them HMOs. So that was a great time for us. We then moved on to helping people who'd been on property investment training based in the UK. So these guys were really keen to get out and source their own properties and put their training into practice, and also to do their own refurbishment. But when it actually came to getting the property up and running, they realised that they didn't either have the skills or the time or the inclination to manage them. So we've become experts in HMO management across Warrington and Wigan. And when I last checked the HMO register for Warrington, we're the second largest HMO agency in Warrington currently. We ended up in Wigan sort of by accident. I've got some friends who've got a HMO in Wigan. And about 2 years ago, they were let down very badly by their letting agent, and they needed some emergency help. So they phoned me, and I've been managing the property ever since. So since then, we've taken on other HMO management in Wigan for other clients. Now, we have amazing clients. Many of our clients have since also become friends, or vice versa, friends have become clients. This is Claude. He's our newest client. And he's given us some really, really positive feedback. Claude came on board literally just before lockdown started. So he was introduced to us by the builder. Claude's based in London, and this was his first HMO outside of London. So he was looking for somebody to help him manage. Unfortunately, the refurb, again, if you've been through this, dragged on and was delayed. You know, went on over Christmas, then the builder was ill and out of action for a couple of weeks, and literally the property was ready to go pretty much just as we entered lockdown. However, we have managed to resolve all the snagging issues, and the property is now full as well. So he's very happy with what we've been doing. I'll just quickly introduce you to Chris as well. Chris is a longer standing client. He's been with us quite a bit longer. He's got a quite complex situation. He's based in Wales, so at the moment currently in lockdown as well. His business partner's in London, so we help him manage the portfolio he has across Wigan and Warrington, and he's still actively looking to build and expand his portfolio, which obviously we're more than happy to manage. Now, throughout my corporate career, part of my job was to help other people across the business keep up to date with regulations that impacted them in the water industry. So I'm quite used to making presentations. It seemed natural, therefore, for me to share my knowledge and experience with other property investors at the networking meetings I was attending. So very quickly, I got invited to speak at various different meetings, and I've been speaking on the networking circuit for many, many years now. This main photo here, it's almost quite sad, really, because it was a meeting I did in February, and it was my last face-to-face networking meeting, and I'm like, I do actually miss the face-to-face networking meetings. At the time, we had no idea what was to come, so I do quite like that photo, but it also does bring back memories that it might be a while before we can actually meet in person again. I've also been asked to be an expert on expert panels. So you can see the top photo here was an event that we did in January, I think. So other organisations and other networking events do ask me for advice on property management. And last year, I'm so glad we took the opportunity. Steve and I have got several clients based in Hong Kong, and they've been asking us for a few years to go over and visit them. They come over and visit their properties here, and we show them round, we go out for dinner, and they've been saying, come over to Hong Kong, you'll have a great experience. And last year we actually took them up on that offer. And we were there for a week, and we actually put on 3 seminars while we were there. So we hosted 3 events over the course of a week for people interested in investing in UK property. So it was great to meet so many new people and to meet all the friends and family of our clients. A newer experience for me is podcasting. So I've been interviewed twice in the last 2 months. So it's been really interesting and exciting. And that's particularly about my new property management training course, which I'll give you a little sneak preview of later on in the presentation. So these days I see more and more people undertaking professional property training, and in my view this is a good thing. I did it myself. I think education and knowledge can really help drive you forward, and with somebody who's already you know, done it, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, made the costly mistakes, got the experience that they can share with you to help you avoid some of the mistakes they might have made. Not only that, but joining a group can give you access to a wide network of support. And it's not just property power teams, so they'll talk about power teams, but I've also found that you might need help on property, on business strategy and planning, mindset, confidence, and being part of a community can give you access to all of this sort of information and support that you wouldn't necessarily get access to by learning by yourself or online, for example. So paying for knowledge and education, I think, is a great way to fast track your learning. However, I'm seeing people only go so far with this learning. So property investing strategy is an exciting first step in becoming a property investor. But tonight I'm going to focus on property management, and I often find that this is seen as a poor relation in the private rented sector. But in my view, this is like paying for training to go and find and buy, you know, like a really expensive luxury car, but don't pay high street prices. So that's your property strategy investing training bit. But then once you've got to the keys to the car, you don't know how to drive it. How do you get it home? Or how do you get a driver to drive you home? And that's where property management comes in. It's all well and good having the right property in the right location, but then you need to make sure you've got the right tenants, that they're paying the right level of rent, otherwise you're just not going to achieve your cash flow goals. You know, and I see a lot of people that think renting out a property is easy. You know, they just find a tenant, hand over the keys and watch the rent coming in every month. If only it was that easy. Don't even get me started on stories with tenants. But as an example, as a case study, let me share this example with you. So this article is from the Sunday Times. Now it is from 2017, but unfortunately it's now even more relevant than ever. It took this London couple 19 months and £35,000 in lost rent and legal fees to get their property back. Now, if you read this in detail, a lot of the problems were somewhat avoidable, and that's what my training aims to help you avoid is these nightmare situations just on technicalities. So the first mistake that they made was that apparently the tenant in this case was referred to them by a mutual friend. So it sounds like they didn't carry out any proper referencing checks. Now, ideally, my rule is never rent to friends or family, but if you do, reference them as you would any other tenant. It's really important from a contract point of view. Now, another mistake that this London couple made was not keeping up to date with all the rules and regulations. And as you'll see in a minute, when I go on to all the various different changes that have happened this year, it is actually really hard to keep up to date with all the change in legislation. But they failed to realise that they needed a licence for their property where they were in London. They didn't know about it. So they'd issued a Section 21 notice. They'd waited 2 months. They'd got a court hearing. They got to court. And at court, their eviction notice was thrown out on a technicality because they didn't have a licence. So they had to start the process all over again. So reissuing a Section 21 notice, they had to wait for the prescribed period. Now at this point, the tenant had managed to get legal aid, and she now started making false accusations and claims against the landlord. So not only were they trying to get their property back, they're also fighting off these vexatious claims. Now, they did eventually get their property back, but only after they were facing repossession themselves. So at this point, they had a tenant that refused to leave and didn't pay the rent. So they were struggling to pay the mortgage, which is an even more stressful situation. So property management is what generates your cash flow. So hopefully this article gives you an idea of how important robust property management really is. So on the training that a lot of people do, they get advised to find a good managing agent. Well, that's great. You know, that would be great advice, but how do you do that? How do you find a good agent? What does a good agent look like? What should they be doing on your behalf? Now, in my experience, I found it difficult to find a good agent, and that's why I set up my own property management business. You know, a good agent needs to know what they're doing. They need to be up to date with the latest regulations, and they provide a good customer service, not only to you as the investor, but also the tenants. Many people in the industry, and particularly trades, don't view tenant as a customer, but they're the ones paying the rent. So you need to provide good customer service to them as well. And as I say, these were the reasons why I set up my own property management business all those years ago. Now, I don't know if you know this, but you need absolutely zero qualifications and experience to set yourself up as a letting agent in the UK. Absolutely nothing. If you're applying for a job at a letting agent, they might ask you for A to C grades in GCSE English and Maths, but that's it. So is it any wonder then that there are so many poor agents out there with such low barriers to entry to the industry? Now, in these unprecedented times, and I know that's an overused word at the moment, but I think it really is, my mission is to provide information and education that you need to fulfill your dreams of becoming a successful property entrepreneur. You didn't set out on this to have empty properties or problem tenants. So my online training program is a natural next step to understand property investment strategy and how that translates into property management. We bridge the gap between strategy and your cash flow goals. You'll learn all about your property management responsibilities, whether you decide to carry that out or get an agent for you. But even if you have an agent to do the work for you, you need to make sure that you know what they're doing and they're checking that they actually do it. As we saw with that Sunday Times article, the buck stops with you. It'll be you going to court and paying the bill if things go wrong. Now, since that Sunday Times article, the situation is even more challenging as a result of the coronavirus crisis. So let's take a quick look at the situation. Now, I have been posting various different videos essentially since March on our YouTube channel about the various different things and legislation changes that have been going on. Now, I'm not going to go through all of that here tonight because there's absolutely loads, but what I will do is I'll just summarise the key aspects of the Coronavirus Act that are in place currently that you need to be aware of. So housing courts have finally reopened after being closed since March. They were due to open in June originally. That was pushed back to August and that was pushed back to September. Now, having been closed for 6 months, the backlog of cases that they'll have is even greater now than it was in March, because even though housing courts have been closed, you can still have issued notices during lockdown. So the housing court is closed, but more and more paperwork's coming in and it's just backing up. So there'll be even more of a backlog now than there ever was before. So if you are going to court for housing cases, you do need to bear that in mind. To add more complication and delay, let's say you do get a court hearing, the court hears in your favour, you get appointed bailiffs. But if you're in a tier 2 or tier 3 area, bailiffs are being instructed not to enforce court action. So even if you are successful and you go through the whole process, it's likely that you're still not going to get your property back at this point in time. And as we've been seeing, the number of areas going into tier 2 and tier 3 restrictions is increasing pretty much on a daily, if not weekly basis at the moment. I've also seen reports that bailiffs have been instructed no evictions can take place at all anywhere in the country between the 11th of December and the 11th of January. And this is similar to the practice in France, where I understand that no evictions can take place over the Christmas period for any reason whatsoever. So do bear that in mind as well. If you are unfortunately going through this process, there's another month's delay there. Perhaps the biggest change in law is that notice periods for both Section 21 and Section 8 notices have now been extended to 6 months. At the start of lockdown, the Coronavirus Act made the notice periods 3 months. Just recently, that's been extended to 6 months. And there are a few exemptions, but the exemption is things like domestic abuse cases that have been proven, and significant rent arrears, which is at 12 months or more rent arrears. So basically, in pretty much every other situation, you're going to have to wait 6 months before you can even start the court process. So this, together with the other issues that I've outlined, really means you're looking at 12 to 18 months to get your property back. If a tenant breaches their contract, or even if you just want a property back to sell it, to refurbish it, you're looking 12 to 18 months here. Landlord responsibilities all remain in place. There's no allowance to landlords as a result of the crisis here. The only slight exemption is that right to rent checks, where you have to check somebody's ID by law to make sure that they can actually rent from you, these can be done remotely for the time being. But under all the legislation that impact landlords, that is the only allowance that has been given as a result of the crisis. So if you're selling or renting a property, you still need to make sure you've got a valid EPC in place. And if not, you've got a commission one to remain compliant. I've got a property at the moment that needs an EPC, but unfortunately the tenant there is self-isolating for 2 weeks. So the surveyor can't go round until that period has expired. Annual gas safety checks are also still required, and there's no grace period here at all either. If your tenant refuses access for you to carry out this legal requirement, the onus is on you to document that you've done everything you possibly can to gain access and why the tenant is refusing access. You need to make sure you keep that evidence to make sure that you won't be prosecuted for any non-compliance. So the onus again is on you. In areas with the highest coronavirus restrictions, non-essential maintenance and checks and visits are being discouraged again. So during lockdown, non-essential maintenance visits were discouraged. But your landlord responsibilities for emergency issues, so for example, if the boiler goes off, the tenant doesn't have any heating or hot water, or there's an issue with securing the property, for example, they've lost the key or the front door lock is broken, you still have to attend to these issues promptly, and there's lots of legislation covering your responsibilities in these areas. The Coronavirus Act did leave the door open for something called a pre-action protocol to be imposed on the private rented sector. Now, at the time, I did another short video on this, and that I think would have been even more challenging for the private rented sector. The protocol is already in place in the social housing sector, so it would have been very easy for the government to impose this on the private sector. They'd literally copy and paste it over. And essentially it's a very lengthy process where you have to have ongoing and detailed engagement with your tenant at every stage before, during and after you have issued Section 8 and Section 21 notices. The good news is the government didn't impose the full protocol. What they did instead is to bring in new civil proceedings. Now, this isn't technically a change in legislation, but it's more around a change in rules of how you approach the court. If you've already issued a Section 8 or Section 21 notice before or during lockdown, what you need to do now is put in writing what is known as a reactivation notice. You need to submit this not only to the court, but also to your tenant. And this is essentially a declaration that says, yes, I still want to go with proceedings to get my property back here. Now, if you don't do that, your case will just simply end up in limbo in court. It just won't go anywhere. No one will do anything. So again, the responsibility and onus is on you to get things moving again. Other things that you need to do is make sure that you take legal advice on this. So there is some prescribed information in terms of the content and how you issue this notice. So again, make sure that you get the appropriate advice. You don't want this again being thrown out on a technicality. Under the civil proceeding rules, what you also have to do now is provide a written submission of the impact of the coronavirus crisis on your tenant. Now, if your tenant stops speaking to you, that's going to be quite challenging, but I suppose you can write about that. But the court wants to know, has the tenant been deemed vulnerable? Has the tenant been shielding? What's the financial impact on the tenant as a result of the crisis? So this is quite a lot of personal information which you may or may not have, depending on whether the relationship with your tenant has broken down by this stage or not. You also now need to submit a statement of rent arrears before a court hearing, and this is a key change. Previously, you would submit it at a court hearing. So again, it's important that you've got all your paperwork in place and you've got the advice and support of either a solicitor or an eviction specialist to make sure you don't get tripped up. And the final point to bear in mind under civil proceedings is that usually there's an 8-week period between issuing the notice and the date of the hearing. So the court would say, right, you've issued the notice, we'll try and get you a hearing within 8 weeks. Under these new rules, that's been suspended. It's basically been scrapped. So what that means is the court can now schedule a hearing for whenever they like. It could be in 12 months' time. And that's really just to help the court manage their capacity and resources. So again, don't expect things to be happening quickly here. Now, a glimmer of good news might be something that's called the Nightingale Courts, which were announced over the summer. These are temporary courts that will use public buildings to increase court capacity. Think Nightingale hospitals here. So it's a short-term fix, really, to try and deal with some of the backlog in a bit more of a timely manner. Now, research from the National Residential Landlords Association showed that the average time before the crisis between putting a claim in and actually getting possession of your property back was more than 26 weeks. That's 6 months. So even before the crisis, you're looking at 6 months. Being realistic with everything that I've set out here tonight, you know, that period is going to be massively extended as a result. And the NRLA themselves have said that even with the extra capacity of the Nightingale courts, you can still expect further delays just because of the sheer backlog. Now, notwithstanding the coronavirus crisis, the onslaught of legislation in the private rented sector has continued unabated in 2020. The Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act was implemented last year, but back in March this year, this act started applying to existing and periodic tenancies. Essentially, this act makes it a lot easier for tenants to take legal action against landlords that do not properly maintain their properties. Under other legislation, tenants have to basically complain about their landlords to the council, and it's the council's responsibility to take action against landlords. Under the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act, tenants can take action directly against their landlords. Now, for most landlords, we know they look after their assets really well. It's not something to worry about day to day, but just be aware that it is there. In April, rules around rules around energy efficiency ratings for residential properties came into force for all tenancies, so both new and existing. So what this means is, under these regulations, a property needs to be graded E or above in order for your property to be legally rented out. There are some exemptions in place, but if you fail to apply for a valid exemption as well and you fail to comply with the minimum efficiency ratings, you can be looking at financial penalties up to £5,000. I've also just posted recently, there's now a new consultation for EPC ratings. This consultation is open until December, so if you want to make your voice heard or put your points across, you can do. Simply go to the government website. The current consultation says that from 2025, all rented properties for new tenancies will need to meet grade C or above. So that's a massive jump in just 5 years' time from a grade E to a C. And that will apply to all tenancies from 2028. So that links into the Green Homes Grant. Again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but the Green Homes Grant is also available to homeowners and residential landlords until March next year. Again, I've got a separate video on that if anybody's interested in finding out more. Also in April, Section 24 tax changes affecting mortgage interest relief took full effect. Now, these have been gradually coming in over many years, but the full effect is now in place. In effect, it means landlords can't claim any tax relief on mortgage interest payments at all. Instead, landlords receive a 20% tax credit towards mortgage interest. It's a bit of a technical difference, but an important one. Those hit particularly hard will be landlords in the highest tax bracket. So you might actually find that you're being taxed when you're making a loss. And this explains why more and more people are now looking to set up limited companies through which to purchase property in order to mitigate their tax liabilities. Another significant tax change that you might have missed in April is that of capital gains tax. If you sell a property now, any capital gains that you make on that property is payable within 30 days of the sale. Now, previously, you would have until the 31st of January of the following year. So depending on the timing, you might have had 22 months to pay your capital gains tax. That's now reduced to 30 days. So again, that's a significant change. Moving into June of this year, the Tenant Fee Act banning any fees in relation to tenancies was extended to cover all tenancies. So this came in last year for new tenancies, now it applies to all tenancies. What that means is if you've got any ASTs in place for existing tenancies and it talks about fees for anything, those clauses are effectively now void. You can't charge any fees under the Act. A legislation change that was more visible in the property press, maybe because it was a quiet month, there was a lot of information about this floating around, was the new electrical safety regulations which were introduced in July. So in short, if you have a single let property, you as well as HMO landlords now need to have an electrical inspection safety certificate carried out at least every 5 years or at the duration on whatever your electrician states, if that's less than 5 years. And these rules will apply to all tenancies from next April. Now, I know we're hovering into November, but if you can, cast your mind back to just before last Christmas. Seems a long time ago now. But the Queen's speech on the 19th of December set out something called the Renters Reform Bill. Now, it has gone quiet on this, and it's not surprising given coronavirus crisis, not to mention Brexit, has taken up so much of Parliament's time this year. However, this does remain in the pipeline, so we need to be aware of what's coming down and could come our way very shortly. Now, there are, as we'll see, there's hopefully some positive aspects to the bill, but the main aspect, the headline grabbing one, is that tenancies will be much, much longer. So people are talking about 12-month or 3-year tenancies. And more importantly, the abolition of Section 21 notices. This is a significant change. With the landlord's option to request their property back for any reason, with reasonable notice taken away, this effectively ends assured short hold tenancies. So they go away. That doesn't, they're not a legal thing anymore. All tenancies would essentially be assured tenancies, which is different, is viewed differently in law. I think there will be many downsides to the removal of Section 21 notices. We haven't issued very many during the time that we've been managing properties in 15 years, but we have used them. And we've used them to recover properties from troublesome tenants. Now, a troublesome tenant might be somebody that maybe doesn't quite meet the bar of eviction under a Section 8 notice for antisocial behaviour, where you actually need an antisocial behaviour order to be issued. But we've had a tenant attack another tenant with a hammer. We've had a male tenant inappropriately proposition a female tenant. We've had tenants persistently just under 2 months in rent arrears. And in all of these cases, we've used Section 21 notices in order to regain possession of the property. I think without that tool at disposal for landlords and agents, tenants themselves are going to suffer, especially if you're in a HMO and you've got a troublesome tenant that you can't evict. It's going to negatively impact other tenants in that property, not to mention, you know, causing trouble for landlords. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see what happens on that. Interesting to note, Section 21 notices have already been abolished in Scotland and were abolished a few years ago, so it might be worth taking a look there and seeing what's happening in Scotland. There are also plans to reform the grounds for possession and the processes courts follow to regain possession. So at the moment you have mandatory and discretionary grounds, and only in certain circumstances can you have what's called accelerated possession. Under this reform bill, they're actually looking at extending accelerated possession to many more grounds for repossession, which would actually be good for landlords. It would speed up the process and mean you don't have to go to court for a formal hearing. The bill is looking to introduce a tenant's lifetime deposit, and this is where a tenant submits a deposit once and then it follows them around various different properties. I think this sounds good in theory, but I'm yet to be convinced it works in practice, because I'm not quite following how a tenant would be able to move to another property and take their deposit with them, because the previous landlord would have to release the deposit, but you can't release the deposit till after the tenancy to make sure they're up to date and make sure there's no damage. So I'm not quite sure how that would work on a technicality. Sounds good in theory. If it can work, it would help a lot of people, but again, I'm yet to be convinced. And finally, the scope for the database for rogue landlords and letting agents will be extended, although sadly there's no plan for a database of rogue tenants, which is unfortunate, but there we go. Now, in the context of all of this legislation that we need to be aware of, there's lots of things here to trip you up. So what I'd like to do this evening is actually share with you some of the strategies I use to make sure my clients only get the best tenants in their properties. And what I'm going to share with you now is a brief insight into some of the topics on that training programme that I mentioned earlier. So hopefully from here on in, you'll be able to take away some hints and tips and advice and apply to your property portfolio straight away. So at the current time, where you can't evict a tenant for non-payment of rent, and you could easily be looking at 12 to 18 months, it's much more important than ever that you make use of these strategies. Let me introduce you to a concept that I found extremely useful. It's something called a tenant avatar. And here, the definition of avatar is your ideal customer. So it's a detailed profile of your ideal tenant. It does take a little bit of time and effort to do this well. And let me give you an example of what a tenant avatar might sound like. Let's say you've got a 3-bedroom house that you want to rent out long term. Your ideal tenants could be a couple called Tom and Julia. They're both 25, they've recently got married and they're looking to start a family. So they're moving from a 1-bedroom flat in the town centre to your property because they want more space to bring up the family. They want to be close to the local primary school, close to your property because it's got an Ofsted rating of outstanding. Tom works as a store manager at the local Tesco and Julia is a solicitor at a firm in the town centre. She plans to take 12 months maternity leave and then return to work. Both sets of parents or grandparents are going to be local so they can help with their childcare. So they've also got that family support. Tom's parents have also offered to be guarantor as well, which would be ideal. Neither Tom nor Julia smoke, nor do they have pets, but they do have a car each, so the driveway parking at your property is really important to them. Let me give you another example. Our tenant avatar for some of our HMO rooms in Warrington is a guy called Piotr. He's originally from Poland. He's 25 and he's come to the UK for work. He works at Amazon. He's got a really strong work ethic and often works overtime. And he sends some of the money he earns back to his family in Poland. Now, he can't afford a car, but he's got quite an expensive bicycle, which he uses to get to work and for commuting around town. So bike storage and security is really important to him. It's one of his key assets. Piotr doesn't smoke, nor does he have pets. Now, I wrote this before the crisis, but even so, he wouldn't go out drinking much because he wants to save up his money to move into a rented property of his own. But what this does mean is when he's not working, his hobby is online gaming. What that means in his HMO room is he wants a computer desk and chair, comfortable, and he wants fast Wi-Fi so that he can game online. It's unlikely that he's able to secure a UK guarantor because he's probably fairly new to the country, but his finances are solid and he can budget well. So I hope these examples give you how detailed you can be to understand the type of tenant you're looking for. It can also help you identify the types of properties you want to buy in the first place, the location you want to be in. So for example, if you are looking for students, you want to make sure that you're buying property in an area that's attractive to students, for example. Now, don't think that a tenant who pays a rent on time and in full can't be a nightmare tenant. They absolutely can. I've not had one as bad as this, but we have had tenants that pay the rent but annoy the neighbours, and we're constantly getting complaints from the neighbours. So they might just be rude, discourteous, loud or whatever to other tenants in a HMO or their neighbours. A good analogy, let's think of this as an analogy, might be somebody visiting a restaurant. They pay the bill, but actually they're rude to staff and customers. You don't want them there, even if they do pay. So a tenant avatar is a good tool to have. So, I've I know somebody at the moment who is looking to evict somebody from a HMO. You've basically got a 6-bedroom HMO with one tenant in it that they're struggling to evict. But obviously they can't then fill the rooms because that tenant is not behaving appropriately. That's not why you got into property investing in the first place. That's not going to achieve your cash flow goals. My key point here is not everybody is your customer. So the sooner you come to realise that and turn potential tenants away at the early inquiry stage, the less hassle you'll have over the lifespan of a tenancy. So now you're ready to advertise your property and start dealing with inquiries. Take time at the inquiry stage to ask questions to see if the person before you matches your tenant avatar, or is at least somewhere near close to your tenant avatar. So for example, you can ask, do they smoke? Do they have pets? Do they have a bad credit history? If we use the example of students again, if you're looking for students, if anyone who approaches you isn't a student, that's not your ideal tenant. So you can say at that point, no, sorry, this isn't for you. By asking a few questions at this stage, you can save yourself a wasted journey and time on the viewing to show the property to somebody that the property is not suitable for them or doesn't meet your criteria. When you're on the viewing, make sure you get to the property a little bit early and check things over before the prospective tenant arrives, particularly if you're in a HMO. You know, basic things like make sure the toilet seat and lid's down, that the tenants have washed up, the bins aren't overflowing. You want to make sure the property is clean and tidy, as good first impressions really count. So greet the person in a friendly manner when they get there. View this meeting as an interview. Obviously, don't tell them you're going to be interviewing them, but you know, you can ask a few questions like, why are you looking to move? Where do you work? How long have you lived in the area? Most people will view this as general chit chat, not interview questions, so don't be afraid to ask questions at this stage. You're just gathering information. Be aware of their body language as well. You can pick up an awful lot from people if you're aware and know what to look for. So do they feel as though they're hiding something? Are they a bit shifty? Will they make eye contact with you? Or are they open and chatty? Some people will just tell you their life story without you even asking, and you're there half an hour later and they've told you everything and more that you ever want to know. So go with your gut feeling here as well. Once you've done a couple of viewings, you'll start to get a good feel for the person in front of you, and go with your gut feeling. It's usually right. We've had a few experiences where people on the viewing, I'm like, really not sure about that person, but they've gone on to apply, all their references check out and everything's been fine. However, the relationship at some point has broken down. And I'm just like, I really wish I had trusted my gut feeling at the start of the whole process. In my experience, even an empty room or an empty property is much better than a bad tenant that you can't get rid of. And particularly in the current climate, as I say, you're looking 12 to 18 months if things go wrong before you can get your property back. Now, once a prospective tenant comes along that likes your property and that meets your criteria, now it's time to get really serious. By this point, you should have really screened out the people most likely to cause you trouble, but there's still more you can do here. So I'm going to just talk you through some of the key points and the key things to look out for. We have a robust application process, so make sure you do make people jump through a few hoops to test them out. Now, we teach in detail our robust application process, all of our screening criteria in our property management training programme. But what I would say here is do make sure that you follow up landlord references. So have they paid the rent in full? Is the landlord likely to return their deposit? Follow up their employer references as well. And don't just phone the mobile number that they've given you. How do you know that's not their mate in the next house waiting for your phone call? Do your due diligence on the employer, check them out. Maybe Google the head office, phone the switchboard number, do whatever you can to actually check out the employer properly as well. Obviously, I would be asking for pay slips as well, so you can marry those up with any information the tenant gives you. Remember, you're entering into a legally binding contract with this person. You're effectively going into a joint venture partnership with them. You're giving them the keys to your house, a valuable asset. So make sure you take the time to do your legal responsibilities. You have a legal responsibility to check their ID, to do that, but also check their bank statements, check their pay slips, follow up with their references, do a credit check, do everything you can to carry out due diligence on this person. You know, a credit report is definitely something you want to check, but you need to take this in the round. You're looking for financial viability of the person, not a hard credit score, a pass or a fail. It's much more nuanced than that. Now, before the Tenant Fee Act came into force last year, we did charge tenants a small application fee. It was nowhere near enough to cover our costs, but what we found was it did stop a lot of time wasters. It's a good way to identify them by asking them for a small commitment. Now, you can't ask for an application fee anymore, but under the Tenant Fee Act, you can ask for a holding deposit. Now, it's capped at a week's rent, so it's probably not very much money, but it is a good way to separate the wheat from the chaff. At this point, if people aren't prepared to put forward a week's rent to apply for your property, they're probably not going to be a viable tenant anyway. You know, we've had people who are struggling to even pay the holding deposit, like, oh, I get paid on Friday, can I pay you then? If they're struggling to pay a holding deposit, which is a week's rent, how are they going to pay a month's rent? They're obviously not going to be financially viable. By asking for a holding deposit, you also can screen out other time wasters as well. So under the Tenant Fee Act, you can legally retain the holding deposit if the prospective applicant has given misleading information on their application. So this is a really good way to ask people to be upfront and honest with their credit history. Now, if people do have a poor credit history, we will still consider them, but only if they tell us upfront. If they try and hide it and mislead us, then they're at risk of losing their holding deposit. We tend to find that if people do pay a holding deposit, they usually go on to be a viable tenant. So this for us is a really good hurdle to get your prospective applicant over, first of all. You might want to ask your prospective tenant for a guarantor, you know, if you are worried about them not paying the rent. However, this isn't always possible, especially for HMO tenants. Depending on the location that you're investing in and your tenant avatar, so for example, our Polish guy Piotr, they might not know any homeowners that would act as guarantor for them. As I say, we often rent rooms to Eastern European migrant workers coming over to work at Amazon and the Hut Group. It's very rare that they can offer up such a viable guarantor, but that doesn't mean to say that they don't make great tenants. And getting a guarantor sounds like a good idea, foolproof method, but there are still risks you don't get paid the rent. I'm currently helping a landlord at the moment whose tenant has stopped paying the rent and hasn't paid for several months. He's contacted the guarantor and asked the guarantor to step in, and the guarantor's also refused. Even though they've signed a legally binding contract, there's really no compulsion for the guarantor to cover the rent. The only recourse the landlord has in this situation is now to pursue the tenant and or the guarantor through money claim online, so small claims court effectively. Now, if you do go down this route, there is an application fee to start the process, so it's costing you more money at this stage. And even if a judgment is made, you then have to pay another fee to enforce that judgment. Now, if you've got a guarantor, it's likely, or it should be likely, that they are a homeowner and that they're employed. So the likely outcome here is that the court would apply an adjustment to their earnings. What this means is that their money, an amount of money, a small amount of money, would be deducted from their salary at source and paid to you towards the arrears. But from what I've seen, these repayment orders are such small sums of money, like £10 a month. You're going to be looking years and years and years before you even get your money back. The other alternative is you can put a second charge on the property. So at the land registry, you can charge a debt to the property. Now, this would only, you would only get your money back if the homeowner then sold the property. However, I have recently found out that if you put a second charge on a property, you can force that person to sell the property in order to get your money back. So by going down that route, I think most people, guarantors would go, actually, yeah, I'll give you the 500 quid rather than you forcing the sale of my house. Because also they don't have to sell the house at fair market value. It's at fire sale prices or 100-day sale prices. So that is worth bearing in mind as well. Guarantor is not foolproof, and to get to the money will actually cost you more time and stress and hassle. Another way you can protect yourself is rent protection insurance policies. Now, the cost of these policies has increased dramatically as a result of the coronavirus crisis. Last year, I could get one of these policies for £75. You're now looking at around £255 for the same policy last time I checked. At the start of lockdown, many insurers actually withdrew this policy from the market altogether, and some haven't even returned to the market. Those that have returned to the market put the premiums up. When they did return to the market, premiums increased in June when housing courts remained closed. Premiums increased again in August when housing courts remained closed for a second time. I've also found that the level of cover is now reduced. So even if you buy a policy now, you're only covered for 6 months lost rent. Previously, other policies I've got in place before the crisis would cover the rent for the duration of the process till you get your property back. So, you know, I've seen discussions on forums of people saying, well, actually, is it worth taking out this policy now, given that the premium is so much more and the cover is less? That's down to your individual decision, depends on your risk and experience. The next important thing you can do is to produce an inventory, or more correctly termed, an inventory and a condition report, as an inventory is simply a list of items in your property, and this is just not going to be sufficient if it comes to a deposit dispute over condition and cleanliness, and they're just simply not stated in the report. The key points to bear in mind here are, I would suggest that you get the property professionally cleaned before the tenant moves in, and state that in the inventory, and also state that you want the property returned in the same condition. Now, if you do end up going to adjudication over cleanliness, the adjudicator won't necessarily make the tenant pay for professional cleaning. They'll just make sure that the property is clean to the same standard. What we have found, and I was on a DPS webinar over the summer, is that just because a property is professionally clean doesn't mean to say it's to a good standard. I've had cleaners in that I've paid for, so they're professional, and the level of their quality of their cleaning has been poor. I could do a better job myself. So it's about the actual cleanliness rather than whether you've paid for that service or not. So just make that clear. But do make sure that you cover everything in the property as well. So it's the fixtures and fittings, but also the structure and fabric of the building, and make sure it's supported by high quality photos. In our programme, we actually go through an inventory in detail, show you how to produce one, direct you towards third-party organisations if you don't want to do it yourself, and you can actually have a practice go as well. Now, don't think just because you're providing an unfurnished house that you don't need an inventory. If a tenant headbutts a wall, throws a brick through the window, or steals a copper pipework, this can all add up. And no, I've not made these things up. I've actually seen these things happen. And they're going to cost you money to rectify. If you don't have an inventory, how are you going to prove that the window wasn't broken when the tenant moved in? It's all about evidence. The inventory and condition report should cover doors, windows, walls and ceilings, as well as the permanent items in the kitchen and bathroom. It's not just the soft furnishings, what colour the sofa is, or, you know, that there's a rug in the front room. Don't forget external features like fences, walls, driveways, sheds, outhouses. If the tenant causes damage to these as well, the costs can also soon add up. Think of this document as another type of insurance. By documenting things in detail at the start of the tenancy also protects you from vexatious claims from tenants as well. As an example, we've had a recent deposit dispute, and the tenant was trying to claim that the property, the furniture and the decor were all in a poor state of repair when he moved in. Well, actually, the property had just been completely refurbished and everything was brand new. So we were able to prove that effectively he was lying. It was a vexatious claim by the check-in inventory report that we had issued and he'd signed for at the point of moving. There was no argument about that. Asking for a security deposit is another step you can take to protect yourself. We've experimented in the past with not taking deposits at all, and to be honest, in every situation this has ended badly. So I always take a deposit now, and I always recommend to other landlords you take a deposit as well. It's just another way to protect yourself. So when we've not taken a deposit, the tenants absconded early, taking the keys with them. So you've got the cost of changing the locks, getting new keys. They don't pay the rent. They're like, oh, well, I'll just leave early, don't pay the rent. And then you've got no deposit in order to deduct the last rent, or they've caused some damage that they don't admit to. And again, you've got no funds to cover the cost of repair. We've also experimented taking council bonds in lieu of deposits. I don't know if you've come across this. Some local councils will say that they effectively underwrite a tenant's deposit. So you don't actually receive any money at this stage. You receive a certificate or a contract from the council saying if at any point you need to claim against a deposit, you contact the council. And so we're like, okay, well, we're open to that. We'll give it a go. We checked it all out, did our due diligence, went horribly wrong. I would not do it again. So this particular tenant that we agreed this with basically stopped paying her rent after 2 months. It took us 7 months to evict her, and this was before the crisis. This is 7 months to get rid of her. And when we talked about the deposit, she basically said, don't care, it's not my money. So she had no skin in the game. There was no reason for her to care about her tenancy whatsoever. Now, we were able to recover the deposit in full from the council without argument, but the deposit, the 5 weeks rent, in no way covered the 7 months rent arrears. So I wouldn't be doing that again. By holding a deposit, the tenant does have has more of a desire to fulfil your requirements until the very end to get their money back. So they want to get their money back. So if you say, can you clean your room? Can you get rid of this rubbish? Otherwise I'm going to hold your deposit. They have then some skin in the game, and they're more likely to fulfill your requests. So keep their rent up to date, leave when they say they're going to do, and clean the property. Now, if possible, you want to protect the tenant's deposit before the start of the tenancy. You've got a requirement to protect the deposit within 30 days anyway, so you can't sit on it for too long. And we tend to find this works well because then you can get the tenant to sign the prescribed information at the same time they sign their tenancy agreement. So if you are taking a deposit, again, this is our whole topic in its own right. You need to make sure you use one of the government approved bodies, and you need to understand the rules and regulations about taking a deposit and the various different pieces of paperwork you need to issue. I see many people end up on the wrong side of regulation simply because they didn't know what was required of them. So if you've seen tonight, there's a lot of legislation and regulation that landlords have to comply with. And simply because they don't know to issue a certain document at a certain time, they're then stuck with a tenant they can't easily remove from the property because of a technicality. I mentioned earlier I worked for United Utilities in my previous career life. I spent much of that time dealing with the water industry regulator, dealing with auditors, responding to consultations and being involved in government working groups. I've seen what happens when things go wrong, when enforcement action is taken, people lose their jobs, there are corporate fines, there are court cases. It just isn't pleasant. One of the main things I did learn from this experience, though, was that paperwork, documentation and good record keeping is absolutely everything. When it comes to the crunch, whoever has the most robust evidence is going to be in the strongest position. It all comes down to evidence. Whenever I do anything with a tenant, I always think, what would the judge say? What would happen in court if I didn't do this? If I did do this, what would happen? And just ask yourself that question every step of the way. Now, I know many people struggle with record keeping. They find it tedious, boring. Yes, it's all of those things. So they don't value it day to day and don't keep up with it. But one of my key takeaway points from tonight's presentation is it really is one of the best ways you can protect yourself and your assets. And this is really the premise that our in-depth training programme is built on. It's how to make sure you remain compliant on the right side of the law, and you can use the law to protect you rather than end up on the wrong side of it. There are many, many documents you need in place by law before you can rent your property out. There are implications and situations where you can't evict a troublesome tenant if you don't have these in place. So it's really important that you take the time to make sure you and your property are compliant. Just some examples of the documents you need to issue before you start a tenancy is a valid annual gas safety certificate, you need a valid EPC, and you need the government's How to Rent guide, and it needs to be the current version of the How to Rent guide. In the regulations, it actually says that if you issue an out-of-date How to Rent guide, it's as if you didn't issue one at all. So do make sure you download it each and every time from the government website. Now, I'm not going to go through all the documents and laws here tonight, we'd be here forever and a day, but we do go through all of these important documents and how to issue them correctly and how to evidence that you've issued them correctly in our online training programme. So it's these legal compliance points, if not done properly, will hinder your ability to get rid of a nightmare tenant. If there's the slightest mistake in any of your paperwork, any claim you have will be thrown out of court and you'll have to start again. Think back to that Sunday Times article. They had to go to court several times before all their paperwork was right. Furthermore, the private rented sector is becoming more litigious. I'm now seeing adverts from ambulance chasing legal teams encouraging tenants to claim damages against their landlord, even if their only misdemeanour is they haven't issued the deposit paperwork correctly. So these topics here are just the tip of the iceberg. Hopefully you can see on screen now all of the topics that we cover in our programme. So it's everything you can do to protect yourself, not only before a tenancy starts, but also throughout an ongoing tenancy. It's not just about finding the right tenant and getting your paperwork up front at the beginning, but also how do you manage that tenancy once you've got somebody in place. So to help fellow property investors understand their property management responsibilities, we've documented what we do in our business, everything that we do day to day, and we've created this self-guided online training programme covering every aspect we can think of property management. We start at the very beginning, so understanding your data protection responsibilities when handling tenant data. Did you know if you have someone's personal data, even if it's their name and phone number, you need to be registered with the ICO, that's the Information Commissioner's Office. So we talk you all through that. We guide you through all the legal documentation you need to have in place to make sure you're compliant. We then cover practical topics such as how to write good adverts, how to take good marketing pictures and videos, how to carry out effective viewings. So we were talking about interviewing people on viewings, not to mention our very, very strict vetting process. Now, before the coronavirus crisis hit, we had 0 rent defaults in our business. Now, as a result of the crisis, we've got just less than 1% of our tenants in arrears. According to a report by lettingaproperty.com, the average rental arrears in the private rented sector before the crisis was 9%. I like to think that our results speak for themselves and show how stringent our checks are to ensure our clients only get the most financially viable tenants in their properties. Within the programme, you also learn how to manage your properties throughout ongoing a tenancy, and this is really important, not only to make sure that you stay on the right side of the law, but also to maintain the capital value of your asset. You've bought a property that's an asset that you want to appreciate in value over time. So we show you how to make sure you stay on top of all the maintenance to help you do that. We also explain what to do when a tenancy ends. We cover what happens if a tenant doesn't pay their rent or leaves having caused some damage to the property. We have won every single deposit claim we've ever submitted. So we talk you through our experiences on how to put together a robust deposit claim. And in 2 cases that I can think of, we've actually managed to get more from the tenant to cover the cost of damage than their deposit. So if you know what you're doing, you can actually cover your costs at the end of a tenancy if things go wrong. Here's a sneak peek at the online training portal. This is their self-guided portal. You can work through the tutorials in your own time. Each topic is anything from a few minutes to no more than an hour long, so that you can fit your training around your existing commitments. One of our current customers still works full time, and he just bobs on and does a 5 or a 10-minute video in his lunch break and a little bit more after work. So you can fit it around your current commitments. You can track your own progress throughout the course, and you can go back to any topic anytime. And the current feedback we've had is great. There's also monthly Zoom call support as well. So if you're stuck on anything or have got any questions, we can have a conference call and we can help you through any questions that you might have. Now, for those of you who are not sure if you're ready for such in-depth training, we've also created something we've called the Landlord's Ultimate How-To Guide. Now, you do get a complimentary copy of this if you join us on the training programme, but it is also a great standalone reference guide in its own right, so we have made it available separately. Now, this is great if you just want to quickly look something up that you're not sure of during your property management journey, or if you've got an agent, you can check, is your agent doing this? You can ask your agent very challenging questions to make sure they're discharging your responsibilities properly. So this covers, again, everything from getting yourself and your property ready, vetting tenants. It covers our vetting process through the day-to-day management and also ending a tenancy. You can see on the contents page there, it's the full end-to-end property management process. This is effectively business in a box. We've documented all of our processes, checklists, templates, and made it available. Several of our customers have already used it to set up their own lettings business. I've actually helped 2 of our customers talk them through. So I've given them extra support as well in terms of getting registered with the relevant bodies, setting up client accounts, all that sort of thing. So that's all extra. But in terms of I'm just sharing that to show you the comprehensiveness of it. Several people have also suggested that we should franchise the information. We could potentially do that. If we were doing that, I think franchises start at around £10,000. I don't want to be selling this for £10,000. I want to be helping as many people as I can avoid the pitfalls in the private rented sector. So instead, we're offering this fantastic resource at cost less than a single tenant fine fee. And I guess many agencies will charge you the first month's rent as a tenant fine fee. So just by buying this, you never have to pay agency fees ever again, if you don't want to. I'm not going to do a sales pitch on you here tonight. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm not going to give you loads of made up discounts like buy now and all that sort of stuff. However, I'm sure there are people on the call tonight that this will be of genuine interest to and genuine value to. So if you feel that is you, I'll leave you my contact details at the end. I'm more than happy to have a chat to see if we can help you. What I would add, many of our customers who've already purchased this, just as an aside, the furthest customer we've had so far is based in Australia. So we've got a lady in Australia who has property investments in the Northwest. So that was quite interesting, trying to post this out during the current crisis. It took twice as long to get there as it should, but it did get there. So wherever you are, we can post one out to you. Don't worry about it. Anyway, many of our customers have asked if we can provide the nearly 30 templates in the Ultimate Guide electronically. So they find them really useful and want to use them in their business straight away. So we've listened, we've taken on board their feedback, and we've actually created a white label PDF pack of all the templates. What this means is you can download them and you can add your own business details, your own company logo to these documents, so that your tenants know that these documents have come from you. It doesn't have our branding on it or anything. They will become your documents. So we're offering all of that for just £249. So you get your landlord's guide and your PDF templates. Like I say, if you're more interested in the programme, you get all of that included in your programme anyway. Let me just share with you Kim. So Kim was one of our very, very first customers, and Kim uses an agent as well. So she has a mixture of properties she manages herself, and she also uses an agent. You can see here that she says the how-to guide was very comprehensive. She's used it to set up and manage new tenancies, and she does say usually I manage an agent. Many people are scared of the vetting process. There's nothing to be scared of. You just need to know what you're doing. And I've often found that third-party referencing agencies are, even letting agents will outsource to third-party referencing referencing agencies, but they have many flaws. I've actually just been trying a few out at the moment, and I find that the third-party referencing agencies just take the tenant's word for things. They take it as read. They don't actually check things out and do their due diligence. So like I was saying, check out the employer, go and Google them, phone the switchboard. They don't do that. So that's another thing to bear in mind and to check what's going on. So she said, I usually outsource tenant management because of the risks and legal ramifications, but actually now she knows as much, if not more, than her current agent, and she can ask her current agent those difficult questions to make sure her properties are being managed properly. Again, as I said, I'm not sure I know everybody here tonight, but let me just throw this in as well. If you are a professional service provider, so like an accountant or an IFA or whatever, and you've got clients who you think might benefit from our Ultimate Guide or our online training program, we also have something we've called PMP Partners. This is essentially an introducer scheme. So if you are interested and want to sign up, for anybody that you refer to us who goes on to buy either an Ultimate Guide or join our program, you get an introducers bonus. There's no risk to you, there's no upfront payment, we don't ask you to buy anything. All you need to do is register with us. If you've got someone interested, pass us their details, we'll do everything else. If they sign up, you get a financial reward. It's as simple as that. So I'm going to leave you with some free resources. I did talk about our YouTube channel. This is a bit.ly link to our playlist. We put videos on there, usually 10 minutes or less. So again, you're not sitting around for hours. We get straight to the point, let you know what's going on. We've also got our Facebook group, Investors Circular, which you're more than welcome to join. So check us out on Facebook as well. If you've got any questions about tonight, I don't know if you've got any time tonight for any questions, but if not, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or you can drop me an email. It's info@thepropertymanagementprogram.co.uk. So my voice is about to go, so I'm going to hand you back to Yoko.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sharon. It's very, very, informative, and there are lots of obviously different experiences that you had gone through your, property management and letting agencies. There are a couple of questions that, if I may go back to your slide, the topics, if you like. And so Roman and Jenny, they're asking, so what if a tenant's boiler breaks down and the tenant is in self-isolation and won't let an engineer in? Would it be the same?
Yeah, that's a very difficult situation. I mean, I would suggest that if that did happen, the tenant's boiler broke down, they didn't have heat or hot water, that they would be prepared to let somebody in. If they're refusing access, they're basically creating their own issue by not allowing access. Now there are ways around that. So the engineers gas safe, so they'll be registered by gas safe. Gas safe has issued guidance on engineers going into properties, so they need to be wearing masks and gloves. Perhaps the tenant needs to vacate the property, like physically leave the property when the engineer's there. They need to make sure all the windows are open for ventilation, all the doors are open. That's a very difficult situation. I mean, what you could do in the meantime as an interim measure is maybe drop off some electric heaters outside the door for them to collect. And just give them advice on maybe how to boil water or heat water for washing and cooking facilities might be like an interim position. I should imagine though, if a tenant doesn't have heat or hot water, they'll be screaming at you to get somebody out to fix it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Another question is on EPC. Does it, the EPC rules, is it also applied to HMO as well?
That's a bit of a grey area. So technically, no, you don't need an EPC for a HMO. However, you do need an EPC to get a HMO license. You also need to issue an EPC at the start of a tenancy to be able to issue a Section 21 notice. So it's a bit of a complex area, and so I would suggest belts and braces. You don't want to trip yourself up. An EPC for HMO is a definite must.
Right. Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions while Sharon is on?
I've just seen some comments. I'd just like to say thank you to Norman for his feedback.
Yes, it's no more questions. Maybe if I can ask a question, you know, Sharon, that those the document packs and whatnot that you talked about. Say, for example, if I would like to buy, you know, if not the course, but you know, I would like that those are templates and whatnot. Once I buy it, then you know, and then obviously legislation and things they are updated as and when it's necessary. Would I receive update or you don't? And then you know, when update is issued.
Okay. That's a good question, actually, Yoko. I haven't actually sold the PDF templates as a standalone product in its own right, but there's no reason why we couldn't. And there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't. And I'm just quickly thinking through, the templates are things like application forms for tenants, questions to ask tenants when they phone up, how to manage your maintenance, house rules to give to tenants to make sure that they understand the AST. What's not included, and I deliberately haven't included it, is an AST itself. So that's where the legislation might change. But what I do signpost people to is there's actually a free AST you can download from the government website. So you don't have to be paying a solicitor, you don't have to join any associations. They have what's called a model template on the government website. So as part of my course, I refer people to that and I explain to people how they fill it in. So that covers the legal side. In terms of the other templates, then they're fairly standard and they wouldn't necessarily change as a result of legislation. But if anyone wants the templates on their own, I'm happy to have a chat about that. We just haven't done that yet, but there's no reason we couldn't.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Any questions for Sharon? No? Right? Oh. And Timo saying, yeah, can I ask a question, please? Yes, of course. Would you like to unmute, Timo?
Oh, hi. It's Baz. Timo is my son, and I'm doing it from my son's.
Hello.
So, one of my tenants.
Oh, the voice is very, very small. I can't even hear you.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
No.
Is it any better?
Yes, that's a little bit.
All right. So hi, Sharon. It's about a tenant I have. He was being furloughed, and I am yet to get an update about it. But if he is made redundant and he's not going back to his work, he's only been paying 50% of the rent until now. And I mean, what do I need to do now to? I mean, if he's lost his job, how am I going to recover my rent and moving on? I mean, what do I have now?
Okay, I suppose it depends whether you have agreed that 50% rent cut was almost like a deferment rather than you've let him off with it. I suppose that's the first thing. Is like, does he still owe you 50% of the rent, or actually have you written that off, is the first thing. What I would say is you need to keep the relationship with the tenant as amicable as possible. The last thing you want is for him to stop speaking to you. During the crisis, I've maybe been a little bit more commercial, so we say, so that if people have gone on furlough, I haven't offered them a rent reduction. I've said the rent is still due. If they're struggling to pay, I've maybe let them pay late, but it's still due, and then they enter into a repayment plan. What I have done is provided them with a lot of support and resources though. So again, it might be in one of my YouTube videos, but I direct them to Universal Credit, and I make sure that they apply for Universal Credit, and I've supported some of my tenants in helping them apply for that as well and getting their housing allowance benefit. I've directed them to various charities. So there's one I think called Step Change, There's also a government organisation called the Money Advice Service, which I direct my tenants to who struggle financially. That charity can actually go through all of their income and expenditure and help them budget and come up with an affordable repayment plan. The last thing you want the tenant to do is say, oh, I'll pay you 100 quid a week, and they just possibly can't afford it. So what is a reasonable repayment plan? So I think you need to decide going forwards if that tenant is can you help him, support him in work, for example. So other things I've done is I've provided my tenants with links to recruitment agencies, with job sites online, and encourage them to find alternative work, and just giving them as much support as possible. But I guess you need to decide whether you're happy for that tenant to continue. You also probably need to check your insurance and mortgages. So some of my clients have got mortgage products and insurances that only permit working tenants. So if he's lost his job and claiming benefits, you might need to just check your policies and make sure that you're actually covered going forwards for a change of circumstances. So there's lots you can do. I suppose it's just keeping discussion with him, but you need to be clear in your own mind first how you want to deal with this.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? So if you maybe, you know, if you have, well, if you could think of any other questions, perhaps you might like to contact Sharon. Sharon, may I perhaps share the your slide or contact details later on?
Yeah, I've let me just I've stuck all my contact details in the chat. So if anyone's interested, wants to get in touch, if you just do save chat at the bottom, the three dots, you can do save chat. You'll have my contact details, and then just feel free to get.
Yeah.
If you want to circulate that email address as well, Yoko, that's fine.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Thank you so much. Anybody else would like to talk? Yeah, okay, well, thank you so much, Sharon, for coming and you know, sharing the knowledge. So
I hope it's been helpful and not scared you too much.
It's a horror stories, isn't it? It's all the joy of dealing with some horrible tenants. Right, okay, thanks very much, Sharon. Thank you. So the next speaker is Kevin. Hello.